This is Democracy Watch. Mark, Donald Trump just got some bad news from a federal judge. As you know, he moved to fire thousands of USAID employees. That effort didn't work especially well in court. Can you explain what just happened?
Yeah, this is breaking news, and this is really, really important because we have seen Donald Trump target USAID. We have seen Marco Rubio, who, by the way, used to say he was a big fan of USAID. He turned out to go along with this, and we saw Elon Musk, most importantly, perhaps, target USAID. And the net effect of this was to try to put on administrative leave 2,700 employees of USAID overseas, and 500 of them were put on administrative leave before this lawsuit was filed. And as of Friday night at midnight, the remaining 2,200 were supposed to be put on administrative leave. Well, this judge, appointed, by the way, by Donald Trump in his first term, blocked it and said, nope, those 2,200 people cannot be put on administrative leave. And the 500 people that were put on administrative leave need to be taken off administrative leave. So this was a big win for Democracy Forward, the legal organization that brought this lawsuit on behalf of these folks. A big win for USAID, obviously, the people who do the work, and a bit of a surprising black eye to many, to Elon Musk and Donald Trump.
Mark, before we go further into the legal implications of all this, can you just talk about what USAID is, what it does, and really, frankly, why Americans should even care about the preservation of this program?
Yeah, I mean, what's interesting is that USAID was created during the Cold War as a tool to win the Cold War. The idea was that we needed, in order to win the fight against the Soviet Union, against Chinese influence in Southeast Asia, we needed an agency that would deliver aid to people and thereby garner goodwill towards the United States, because in many, many parts of the world, the delivery of aid is inextricably linked with sort of the hearts and minds of the local population. So the idea was that if people were getting bags of grain that had an American flag on it, saying courtesy of the American people, and there were workers on the ground who are vaccinating their children or helping build roads, that this was a way to help win the Cold War, to defeat communism, defeat the Soviet Union. It was part and parcel of a number of other programs like this, like, for example, the Peace Corps, right? The Peace Corps was also a program built by John Kennedy to defeat the Cold War by, again, creating this sort of soft power. And so over the years, Brian, and this is really important for people, over the years, some of the biggest proponents of USAID have actually been conservative pro-military hawks, because they view, if you are a foreign policy hawk, if you're, anti-Russia, anti-China, USAID has been viewed as one of the most effective tools to defeat China's expansionist plans, to defeat Russia's expansionist plans, and to, like I said, garner the goodwill of the local populations in a lot of parts of the world. So, the undoing of this is just a gift to the communists, in Beijing. This is a gift to Vladimir Putin. This is not helping America maintain its position of strength around the world.
Well, can you dig into that further? Because now what happens if USAID goes away? Which, by the way, I know that the Elons of the world will frame this as some massive example of waste, fraud, and abuse. This is about 0.5% of the federal budget. And in exchange for that, to your exact point, we garner goodwill across the world without having to engage in any conflict, without having to fire any bullets. That's just a way to win over countries across the entire planet. So what happens in the absence of USAID that China would be looking to do, for example, given the fact that we would no longer be there?
Yeah, so I mean, China has its own program along these lines, as does Russia, as does ISIS, as does Iran, right? I mean, like, every time we talk about, as does North Korea, right? Like, every time we talk about these programs of influence, how is it that ISIS gains a foothold in a place, or how does China expand into Africa? It is oftentimes by setting up local aid services, setting up clinics, providing services at the local level. And USAID is a critical piece of doing that for the American public, so that people who feel like they are being fed by the United States or get, like I said, getting vaccines from the United States are less likely to be susceptible to Russian, to Chinese, to other terrorist movements who are otherwise competing to do that. So this is a huge win for China. I mean, like the biggest single victor of this plan is going to be China, because China has been actively courting to get into this area, and they have a very well-funded program, and they will step in the void.
Right. And China's program is the Belt and Road Initiative. And to your exact point, now that the U.S. will kind of cede this ground, China is perfectly content to go through, which would presume to me to be against the interests of the United States, again, for a fraction of the cost of having to go to war in any of these countries across the world, just doing goodwill, aside from the fact that it's just virtuous to do HIV prevention. It's virtuous to do clean water programs and on and on. We also get to garner that goodwill, and that'll help us economically, it'll help us with our national security, it'll help us militarily across the world. And so that would be against the interest of the United States, but it's not against the interest of somebody like Elon Musk, who has business interests in Beijing, who has business interests in Shanghai. And so he has a vested interest in making sure that he can help out China where he has the opportunity. And by dismantling USAID, even before he goes into the obvious ones like, DOD, for example, which has failed the last almost dozen audits, he'll go into USAID. And the only people that will be better off in the long run as the result of this are going to be the only country that Elon is looking to expand his foothold in, which is China.
I mean, what is really sad is that there has been so much misinformation, disinformation spread about USAID and about what has been going on that, as you said, in sort of your initial question, like if you're just an average American and you're reading about this, you're thinking, oh, this is good. They're saving money. They're not taking our taxpayer money and using it abroad. But the fact is that the way in which USAID money is spent, as you said, is some of the most effective ways to make sure that you have pro-U.S. governments, you have pro-U.S. populations, you have folks who, aspire and see the United States as a friendly force. And what does that do? That means that as those societies develop, they become friendlier for American products. As governments form around them, they become more friendly to the United States, not just on a military basis, by the way, but also on all these other bases. I mean, every time we withdraw from the world's stage, it is not just that China is offering more aid or military support or anything else. They're also looking to build trading partners. And that is why it is so inexplicable that this is. But Brian, I want to say there was a lot of talk at the beginning of this administration about how competent they were going to be. Remember that? Like they were going to come in and they were going to be super competent. Yeah. They keep losing court case after court case after court case. And I want to bring it back to something that I said. They lost this case before a judge appointed by Donald Trump in his first term. Now, that there are, I think, two things to take away from that. The first is that I think people assume that every judge appointed by Donald Trump is going to always rule in his favor. I don't think we should look at a judge in Florida, for example, as the iconic example of how all judges work. This judge, I think, had a very thoughtful hearing, wrote a very thoughtful opinion. But the second thing is that, people can't give up the fight. They can't think that there is no way to fight back against these things, because the fact is Donald Trump keeps losing these lawsuits. I mean, Donald Trump has now lost lawsuit after lawsuit after lawsuit. His Department of Justice, the lawyers there must be shell-shocked by the number of cases they are having to defend and make fools out of themselves, frankly, in some of them. But they keep losing them. And the Department of Justice is not used to losing cases. And that's really the point I want to hammer to everyone. It is very unusual for a federal judge to slap down the Department of Justice over executive power. That's just like, I mean, you really have to go a long way to overstep. And yet we keep seeing in case after case after case, that's what's happening. And so I'm sure these DOJ lawyers don't know what to do. Of course, they're also potentially being asked to retire, to take early retirement, or being threatened with being fired. So I'm sure that's not helping. But it's showing that the fight in court is working. So I just want to make sure everyone knows that.
Well, that's a good opportunity to underscore that, you have been consistent in pointing out that the courts are going to serve as our last and most effective bulwark against the worst excesses of the Trump administration. And you obviously cover them extensively on a daily basis with Democracy Docket, which is the news outlet you founded to focus on everything voting and elections. Highly recommend if you are looking for any news regarding what's happening in the courts, which again are proving that they are up to the task right now of standing up to the Trump administration in the same way that these Republicans in Congress are not. Please make sure to sign up for Democracy Docket. I'll put the link right here on the screen and also in the post description of this video. I'm Brian Tyler Cohen.
I'm Mark Elias.
This is Democracy Watch.